I had a suicidal ideation, a really bad one. Thoughts of suicide. And I was on the fourth floor of Auckland Central Police Station, and I looked out the window and went, it's not high enough. And I knew, because I'd just become a crisis negotiator, what was happening inside my head. I was in a bad place.
You're listening to the Everyday Legends podcast, the show that is dedicated to championing everyday men and supporting you in getting more from life, love, and the everyday. I'm your host, Mike Campbell, and the aim of this podcast is pretty simple: to support you in building rock-solid foundations, legendary integrity, and kick-ass relationships with plenty of stories, a load of lessons, and a solid dose of some loving straight talk. So let's get started. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Everyday Legends podcast. I'm your host, Mike Campbell, and today I'm excited to bring you one of my fellow Kiwis and a man by the name of Lance Burdett. Now, I'm going to give a bit of context to how this came about. Lance, I first heard on, it was the radio technically, but the podcast of a radio, anyway, back in 2020. And I heard this guy and I was like, whew, that's an interesting dude right there. I need to talk to him. Man, he's got a great take on things. And he was speaking about the brain, a book that he just written called Dark Side of the Brain. And he was speaking about sleep and anxiety and navigating challenges and so on. This was on a podcast that I listened to at a radio show in New Zealand. It's called The Matt and Jerry Show. And I enjoy it. It's slightly childish humor a lot of the times. And it's one of the ways that I kind of feed the little boy in me that likes to laugh at funny, stupid shit. And then just recently, I was listening, because I'm in New Zealand, to the radio show, and they were speaking to Lance in relation to the COVID vaccine mandate protests that are happening outside Parliament in New Zealand. He is a former police negotiator. That was the context in which they were speaking to him. I instantly heard that, and I was like, that's that fucking dude I heard a few years ago. And so I went back to my notes and I'd written down the exact episode of theirs that he was on. I went and found it and I listened to it again. I'm like, oh yeah, I definitely got to interview that guy and have a conversation with him. I trolled through the internet. I found him in some places. I reached out to him. I said, here's what I like about what you're doing. I'd love to have a conversation with you about X, Y, and Z. And he reached out and he was like, yeah, that sounds great. Let's have a chat. And boom, here we are. We had a great chat about all sorts of things around certainty, around crisis, navigating crisis and challenging shit and all sorts of situations. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read you Lance's bio, and then I'll give a little bit about what we get into, and then of course you can go and get into the show. Okay, here is it's his more in-depth piece from his website. After a successful career in the construction industry, Lance spent 22 years with the New Zealand Police, becoming the lead crisis negotiator. He qualified in New Zealand, Australia, and with the FBI in the US. He was described by senior police as, quote, the most qualified and highly skilled negotiator within New Zealand Police, having trained and operated with the elite tactical teams of police, corrections, fire, emergency responders, the military, and FBI. Qualifying as a personal protection officer, Lance oversaw the safe protection of the New Zealand Prime Minister, international dignitaries, and people on the Witness Protection Program. He was the principal security officer for the New Zealand athletes in Commonwealth Games and the 2012 London Olympics. As a commissioned officer, he directed the immediate response to the full range of critical incidents and was a senior detective leading teams on complex criminal cases, including homicide. Lance has a Master of Arts degree majoring in terrorism, safety, and security. He has a graduate diploma in business studies, a diploma in policing, and a graduate certificate in applied management. Whew. Lance published a best-selling book, Behind the Tape, Life on the Police Frontline, detailing highlights of his police career as well as personal anecdotes of depression and suicide. And we're going to talk about that in the podcast. His second book, Dark Side of the Brain, Adapting to Adversity, quickly became another bestseller with a focus on well-being. So we get into lots of things around the brain, around adapting to adversity, handling, as I said, crisis, really challenging situations, dealing with people. We talk about a story where Lance was the lead police negotiator, which took him into all sorts of scenarios, as well as dealing with people who were suicidal and, in the midst of potentially about to suicide. And he goes in there as the person to navigate that situation and, quote unquote, talk them off the edge, whilst himself being heavily depressed and suicidal. How's that for you? And so there's some pretty remarkable stuff in here. And one of the things I want you to listen out for is when we start talking, one of the things that we're kind of talking about is, if you're dealt with someone who's in a very, very emotional state and they're potentially going to do something that is quite extreme or very ineffective and not very good for them, let's say. So it'd be very easy to confuse that for you. Well, I'm not going to come across someone who's suicidal, but what we're talking about really in this is how you have conversations with people who are coming from a very emotional, let's call it triggered state. Oh, hello, welcome to the fucking world in 2022. And of course, your relationships. But where I also want to take this with him and we explore is, okay, I'm the person who's acting in an emotional state. How do I navigate this? How do I actually go through this and manage this and regulate my emotions and deal with adversity? We talk about a lot of this stuff. So I'm really excited for this conversation. He's a straightforward, down-to-earth Kiwi bloke, and it was wonderful talking with him. I got a lot of this from this myself, and I think you will too. So on with the episode in a moment. But now, hey, hi, it's Mike. Remember, if you get a lot from this podcast, please pass it on. Please like, subscribe, click download first, all those kind of things. If you find some of our pieces of content on social media of this, share them around. It helps us get this in the eyes and ears of more men who need it, more everyday men who want to get this shit together and get more from life and understand themselves and how to be themselves more powerfully in the world. If you want to work with me and check out some of my programs and my courses and my offerings, then come along to my website and have a look. Send me a message and I can answer any questions you've got. All right. And now onto the show. Let's go. Lance, welcome to the Everyday Legends podcast. It's great to have you here.
Thanks so much for the invitation. Yeah, it's going to be great to chat, I just know.
Beautiful. So, Lance, there's, I'm sure, many things that we can explore. We've had a very brief chat about something very present for you at the moment. But as is quite normal, I suppose, on many types of shows and so on, the guests often know maybe they know the host. They might know something about the guest. I know a little bit about you from what I've kind of read and listened to. So what I'd love to do as a starting point is to explore a little bit of Lance. And here's my question, and please, you can take this anywhere you want. Who is Lance Burdett?
Oh, dear. Lance is still trying to find himself. So I started out as a builder until the age of 35. So I left school at 16. Mm-hmm. It was the earliest time you could leave, became a builder because that's the highest qualification I got in high school was what they called then woodwork.
Right.
And so I became a builder, hated it, achieved quite high, became a construction manager, and then decided to leave. I just wasn't enjoying it. So I left and joined the police at the age of 35. Again, progressed fairly rapidly, I have to say, with becoming a detective through to detective inspector to what they call a band 3 inspector, which is only, I think, 5 or 6 in the country, right. Just a handful of those. And so I became the lead crisis negotiator for New Zealand Police. I was fortunate enough to go to the FBI and qualify as an FBI negotiator, whatever that means. It means I've attended their course. Yes. And qualified, counter-terrorist negotiator in Australia, and did lots of very cool things while I was in the police. Went to the Olympics, went to the Commonwealth Games as the security advisor. So just did some very cool things. Had depression while I was in the police. And then, it must be 7 years ago now, at the age of, what would have been, 57, decided to, I'm done. I'm, old. I need to go and find something else. And so I've really settled into a career now by starting my own business at 57, where...
And that was leaving the police from those roles at 57.
That's leaving the police from everything. And that's the big thing, right? I'm leaving all of these roles to do what? To go to an insecure where you've never untested, untried, didn't do any market surveys, just thought, let's see what happens. What's the worst? You're going to have to go and get a real job. And so on that journey, I've learned a lot. I now work in the area of neuroscience. So that's what my programs are all based in. And and now it's our. So all my family work for me.
Oh, wonderful.
So there's 4 of them. They all work flat out to keep me on the road and keep me going. And we've developed the business as we've gone along. So still finding myself, still finding a way forward, but a lot more settled than I was, I have to say, than most of my life. Can I say that?
Okay. Yeah. Interesting. And there's, some things I've heard you speak about previously, and in amongst that, leaving this quote unquote secure job, where we can often tend to tie a lot of our security as to our perhaps one and only source of income. And in that, I'm hearing a lot of experience in dealing with external sources of trauma and crisis and so on. But you kind of alluded to one point there was when you were in the police, there was some depression in yourself. So something else that you were dealing with. Can you take us through, because I've also heard you speak about part of that role as in the police was dealing with, I'm assuming, lots of, like a myriad of different types of situations, including people who were suicidal and close to suicide. And I've heard you mention about some of your own experiences and around that whilst you were in that role, kind of dealing with the external, but there was also the internal. Can you kind of talk us through that a little bit?
Yeah, look, so when people get down, I just call it down, right? They get under the weather and they're under the pump and they just don't, things aren't working great upstairs. We seem to divorce our physical self from it. It becomes two people, if you like. It becomes you as a person and that other thing that's inside your head.
Right.
It's trying to fix it, right? And you learn to live with that voice and to live with that continual barrage of negative comments. You sort of learn to live with it, but it does take you down this little hole. But you can function. And this is the thing that we don't know. And this is why, one of the things I learned very early on is when I went through this was you never know who's standing next to you, what they're going through.
Right.
And the more I talk about this, the more I learn and the more I discover about people. Look, just an example, I've just had a bit of a sonograph on my shoulder. And I was talking to the sonographer and he said he had even chosen the tree. And I just didn't quite get, and then I went, gotcha. And so, and he never went for help, never had any of this. And so that moment for me just then was this real kicker.
Right.
And I was like, and the more I talk with people, what do you do for a job? I say, oh, look, I do de-escalation and how to manage emotional people. And I was in the police, I was a negotiator, Christ, and I, suicide intervention, prevention, intervention, and postvention now was my specialty in the police. And he just said, oh, well, I chose a tree. And that you just don't. I'm a taxi driver. So wherever I travel, just about everyone I speak with, and I'm not. They're just people in the world, in the neighborhood, and whatever. And they'll always tell me about either someone they know or usually themselves. And so it's very common for us to go through struggles, not perhaps down into that, but there's always events that happen in our life that are significant, that make us stop and think. And so now what I'm learning is that you have to take it one step at a time and question everything. And so I've just been told I have to have urgent surgery on my shoulder. And I'm thinking, my business, how am I going to do this? How am I going to get paid? How am I going to get the family going? Stop it. Stop it. Today, I just gave a presentation up on stage, had my arm in a sling. Great. The funny, I actually use this stuff to my advantage now.
Yeah.
So the first thing I started with was when I was quite uncomfortable to open up and say to people, this is stuff going on in our heads. And to tell my story was quite hard. So what I would do was make jokes.
And this is when you're in one of these kind of crisis negotiation management situations.
Oh no, and that is quite different. So, and I think, so I see what you do. They're hitting the point. Yeah. So when as a crisis negotiator, now I was for a while suicidal myself. But you learn in that situation that it's not about you, and it gives you something to focus on, right? And you focus on the other person, and you share experiences, and you share emotions. This is the key. Yeah. See, the thing about this thing, it's wired to respond to emotions. So the amygdala, every piece of information that comes into our head, attaches an emotion first, and that's what the brain is wired to do. That emotion goes back to our hippocampus for a reference. What have you done in your life similar to this? And then it should go through to the prefrontal cortex for the final action. that disconnects when you're back in the limbic system. And so being able to help people helped me.
Right.
And that's continued.
Yeah.
And so when I first started my presenting on leaving the police and presenting and telling my story, I didn't tell it a lot, right? So one of the things that I made sure was it was the right audience.
Yes.
But when I was asked to share a story, I always was able to talk about myself as I was in the third person, and this is sort of but I was imagining myself, Lance.
Right.
But then I'd make jokes about it, little jokes about, but I'm all good now, thank you. Just to lighten the mood.
Yes.
And lighten my mood, I guess.
Yeah. Ease some of the tension.
That's it. And so now what I've learned to do is to still continue to divorce myself from what I'm doing, but using these little adversities to your advantage. So when I was a crisis negotiator, I was able to say, you never say, I know what you're going through, right? No one knows what you're going through.
Yeah.
I understand. Do me a favor. No one understands. And so all I say is, I've been where you are, and it's not good, is it?
And so can you then break that down for us a little bit?
Yeah.
How is I've been where you are different to I understand what you're going through?
So each of us goes through events in our life, and how we respond to those events, there's two parts. So there's a genetic part to our response, but that's only minimal. The biggest part, and there's the biological, of course, how our brain is wired. But the largest impact on all of us is what we've done in our life, our experiences.
Yeah.
And so each of us has different experiences and different ways of dealing with things. And this is the key to it, right? So I've just done a presentation this morning to a big organization here. I do their resilience stuff now. They call it resilience, but I call it adapting to the world. And we talked a lot about this stuff, and each of us comes with different experiences. Yep. And so I give people a whole range of things and say, I've given you a whole lot of stuff. I don't want you to do any of it. I want you to do one thing that works for you. That's why I've covered a whole lot over. And this is the key. So I might understand what you're going through as far as the process goes, but I don't understand what you're going through as a person and your emotions.
Yeah, and your lived experiences. I don't have those to call on, but perhaps more from a broader aspect, I've been in this kind of position.
Yeah, that's it. So yeah, I mean, you could say, and for, I mean, one of the things I learned to say in the FBI, which is what North Americans do, is they say, I understand what you're going through. I understand how you feel. And that for them works because that's the way they use their language. For us, it's probably not the right thing. In fact, it's not the right thing to say because you don't understand, right? And
yeah,
so,
I can. If you're saying I'm feeling anxious, I can certainly say I, can resonate with feeling anxious, but I can't resonate with your exact experience right now because those are actually two different things.
That's it. That's exactly it. Now, as your crisis negotiators, their golden rule: 2 ears, 1 mouth. I've been through something similar. What are you going through? And that just gets them to open up. And you can use these things. And now, so how does a crisis negotiator stay safe? So mine was nothing to do with the stuff I'd done. So it was burnout. My depression was caused by burnout, not looking after myself and not sleeping well. And so when I would ask them stuff about what's going on for you and what are the things in your life that are, and I might just sort of, it's called affirmation, or you can call it anyway. We call it acknowledging the emotion disarms it. And I might just say to the person, it's a hell of a challenge, isn't it? And all that does is I stand beside the person, not seeing it from their position. I just stand beside them and we try and guide them. And that's life, isn't it? You just guide people through. Don't push on. But look we've got a bit of a protest going on in Wellington, in New Zealand at the moment. They're pushing on people, and people are going to push back and dig in. If you turn sprinklers on and play loud music and all that sort of stuff, well, guess what? They're going to galvanize.
Yeah, and I suppose, and maybe you can speak to this. I suppose we can use that as an example, but, in numerous examples, if someone is, let's say, backed into a corner, or perhaps if they feel like they are in a state of survival in some aspect, then a response is going to be different. And that's perhaps where that pushback will come, right? Because I'm going to go into fight or flight mode.
That's it. So we want them to put them into freeze.
Right.
So the way I do that is I get them to think. So you either ask a question or get them to think, which brings them into the prefrontal cortex, which reconnects this. So when we're in a heightened state or a lowered state, in an emotional state, we're in our limbic brain, so the emotional brain back between our ears. And the prefrontal cortex is referred to a lot as the executive function. It is the action station. It's where logic sits. It's where problems are solved. It's where we rationalize everything. We've got to bring them back here. So either one, I'm going to ask you a question, or two, I want you to think about what I've just said, which will bring you to here. And that's the key to everything, I think, when you're talking with somebody. If you say you should, the brain will they'll just shut off. They'll go, you shouldn't, listen to me. It's that voice, right, that we all have inside our head. And it talks to you constantly.
So does this speak to this kind of idea almost as well of like a bit of a pattern interrupt? Like it gets you out of, short of the terminology, it gets you out of focusing on what you're ruminating in and into a different state, a different place of being, and I can engage with something else.
So you're trying to bring them here to finish off the process.
Yeah.
So the way the brain operates is everything piece of information that comes into our head goes to the limbic system first. An emotion is attached. Is there danger? The only reference we have is our past life. And so we go back there to get some information, to think about a similar event we've been on, and then is supposed to come back to here with what was information going back to the timeline is now intelligence, back to here to what is your final action? What's the final outcome? And that's disconnected for many people when they're in that heightened state. So when we're talking now, we could use that example of the protest group. They feel a need to protest. So that's the first thing. Two, they don't know how, but there's a group already down there. So I'm going to go and join them because it's a similar thing. They just don't like what's happening in New Zealand at the moment. So they'll all join together. Now let them vent, right? So 1 or 2 days, by all means, camp out. Engage with them early. Say to them, a couple of days, look, we're happy with that, but here's the rules. And by the way, we want to sort of talk with somebody to see what you actually want. Because the police are trying to do it, and the police can't negotiate anything. They can only negotiate leave.
Yeah, they can't
or stay, right? They can't negotiate on part.
About.
No, they can't actually get to them. So they're stuck between a rock and a hard place. But when you start doing things like, turning up batons and turning up in tow trucks and turning up with the military, and that disassociates you with people and forces them into a corner. And essentially that's what's happening around the world at the moment. Yes. People are forced into, particularly those who are vaccine reluctant.
The thought that just came to mind was something, I was born in 1982. So I feel like I was probably just on the cusp and the outer side of, like punishment in schools and stuff. I remember when I first started school, there was a few hands being hit and so on. But that is the idea that comes to me, right? It's the stick. And that doesn't seem to go very well. In fact, we've seen good reason to remove that from homes and schools and things like that. But we actually seem happy to use it in other places and keep doubling down on it.
And this is the thing, right? Don't push on people. Don't use the stick. It's the carrot and the carrot today.
Yeah.
Because the brain has changed. So over time, with the introduction of technology and the advances in technology, it's actually rewired our brain, because these things here are addictive, right? Because of dopamine, and dopamine's rewiring our brain. So the younger the generation, the more empathic they are, the more hypersensitive to others' emotions. And because of that, the brain has changed. Now I'm catching up with a guy later on this week with somebody who does a new way of learning. So it's the old goggles on and that immersive training, right? And that's the new way forward. For someone like myself, it's like, really? And I'm quite excited about it. I'm quite looking forward to it. So understanding things like, you know, I hear people say, well, we're wrapping people in, our young in cotton wool. They need to have that stick. They need to be shown. No, they don't, because their brain's different. They don't need, we need to listen first. And it goes back to that whole 2 ears, 1 mouth.
Yes.
We can't deal with things the same way.
Yeah, if something works for me and I'm doing okay, then it should work for someone else.
And this is the key, right? So let me give you this example of my generation. Not all of them, but a substantial number said, get our kids outside, get them climbing the tree, get them doing, you know, riding their bikes to school. Well, let me ask you this. I grew up in a small town, a Hudge town, called Bulls, right? Rangitikei. You walk to school, Lance, no problems, because there's no cars. You do that same road today, it's State Highway 1. Would you let your kids ride or no? Yeah. Too dangerous. Second thing, they're always on games. Get them outside, get them off those games. Yeah, sure. But when you got TV, that's how old I am. When you got TV, I bet you sat in front of TV and didn't go outside. And I bet you had your dinner in front of TV in case you missed something. So each generation has these things, right? And we tend to forget that.
Yeah.
Because each generation's doing things differently. So sure, we need to teach our kids how to climb trees, but to do so safely. We need to let our children ride bikes on a walkway or a cycleway, perhaps not on the road. This is the key, right? Because the world has changed, so we need to change with it.
Nice. Yeah. And also what I'm hearing in the, if we come back to the idea, I suppose, of the carrot and the stick, is that that's also very binary. And there's a lot of nuance in human behavior and human psychology, right? And if where I'm being taken in my head is perhaps in the realm of, say, a relationship where, and I see this a lot in men that I work with, we're very keen to go black or white with something. You know, like if a guy is a pushover, he thinks that the answer is to be an asshole, and he doesn't like that. But there's a lot of nuance in there, having respect, setting boundaries, and so on, right?
Yeah. So again, go back to the brain has changed, right? So the men, for example, dealt with emotions differently. Earlier times, we showed fear and emotion, we were attacked or killed, right? So the brave face came, and as a result of the brave face also came compartmentalization. Let's put that rubbish back here, all those emotions things, and let's not talk about it, because we don't want to lose face, if you like. And so what men learned to do was compartmentalize. We don't talk about our emotions. And so young men today are struggling. They're struggling because they want to talk, they need to talk, because the brain is different, and they realize talking is good. But there's the legacy of our earlier times, suck it up, sweetheart.
Yeah.
And there's this dichotomy in their head of, I got two voices, one saying suck it up and the other one saying you need to talk, and the suck it up's winning. It's going to take a little bit longer for the generations to get used to the new brain, because it takes generations. And so if I can, my plea to the world is listen. It's as simple as that. And hear and listen and hear.
So I love this, you know, and it's a lot of what I believe and do and invite men towards as well. And again, it's not necessarily just about, I need to now cry at the drop of a hat and I need to emote everything. Again, there's nuance. We've got to explore how to regulate and manage our emotions and so on. So I'd love to talk about that, because we were talking before, you know, about crisis management and listening to someone, which of course doesn't need to be, I am a police negotiator and this is a suicidal person, but it can be having a conversation in your relationship where, you know, one person is acting in emotion and we're trying to connect to them as opposed to tell them what to do or what have you. What about just me? I'm not dealing with another person, but I'm going through some shit, a lot of emotion running through me. As you said, historically, men have struggled there a little bit, and you know, you add in perhaps a lot of the conditioning around suck it up and all that kind of stuff.
It's it.
We have this idea. I know you talk a lot about resilience, or as you called it, adaptability, essentially, which I love. What I see is we've often had this kind of misconstrued idea of stoicism, right? Which equates to something like resilience is just to brush everything off. and never approach it, which, you know, to me is very brittle.
Yeah.
That's not
Yeah.
resilience. So
No,
as an
it's
individual, how do we start to really explore these things that are very challenging, that are strong emotions, regardless of where they fall on the scale?
So there's two parts of that. The first part is we can learn resilience. We can learn adaptability, as we call it,
yeah,
by taking some risks that are measured, right? So let's go back to the example of we start school for the first time. I can remember my first day at school. Why? Because I was dropped off at the gate. There you go, off to school. I'm in, although kids are resilient. Oh, do me a favor. I'm scarred for life.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And then there's the other side of it. Come on, darling, let's go into school. Oh, no, I don't want it. All right, we'll do it again. We'll try tomorrow, but at least we've come here today. So good on you.
Mm.
How about we take the child into school as schools are doing, right?
Yeah.
And you can stay for half an hour or an hour until they're settled. Got a friend. See you very soon. Just pop. And so they learn, but we have to learn a different way. Just chucking people in the deep end doesn't. Now, the second part to what you've said is the new way of dealing with past emotions and dealing with things. When you push on something, the brain holds it. And so one of the things I learned was flick the old rubber band on the wrist when I was having a negative thought, which broke the neural pathway. Works, but the thoughts or the emotions still come back on occasion. And now what we're learning is that explore, your term, that emotion. Think about what's happening inside your head. Now, very much like, I guess, meditation. When you have it, you're trying to meditate and you're clearing your head of thoughts. A thought comes in, you let it wash through you. Don't push it away, right? And that's how you shut the brain down. And so one step further, Dr. Judson Brewer, Unwinding Anxiety, he's a psychiatrist. He's explored this stuff and he says, don't push, explore. And he says, get curious with it. Actually, he says, think to yourself, why are you back? And so I go even further, embrace it. What's happening? There's something not right somewhere. And that's the indicator, right? So I know now that when I have a thought about something, I think about it for a moment. And then my first thought that comes, I didn't have a good night's sleep last night. That's what's happening in my head. And so I know that night to get next night to get a good night's sleep, and I can just let it go. Yep, I'm tired. And I know what it is. And for many people, that's what it is.
Yeah.
But they don't know how to let it go. And so they push it away. Oh, stop that thought.
Yeah.
The brain goes, oh, keep having it back, because that's the problem, right? This is an automatic function up here, an automatic problem solving tool. Worry. Catastrophizing. Let me tell you what catastrophizing is. Catastrophizing is nothing more than going through your timeline of your events to see if it can help you.
Right.
I don't know. The example I use in my programs, you're leaving home, bit of a rush, you've got a partner at home. Bye, I'm off. You shout out. Just as you're closing the door, you hear them say from inside, whatever. You think to yourself, ooh, you wait till I get home, I'll deal with this later, right? So you think that, but the brain says, no, I'll help. Do you remember that you were late home last week? Do you remember that fight you had? Do you remember when you first met? Do you remember when you were 7? It just goes back through your timeline.
Yeah.
Is this helpful? Is this helpful? Is it right? Now, it's an auto problem solving tool. It's ourselves talking to ourselves about ourselves, because it's the only reference we have is our experiences. And 80% of that reference is of negative things because of the negativity bias, because that's where the danger is. And so you've got to stop this stuff. You talked about the rumination. That's all rumination is. And it just gets set. It's set. When we're catastrophizing, we're going to a whole lot of things. And those things are now fresh in our mind. When we are ruminating, it's the same thing. And it's stuck like that broken record, you know, that whole, and it just regurgitates and regurgitates. So that's why it's important when you've got these things going on. 1, understand it. 2, go and get some help.
Yeah, I love that.
Or certainly talk with somebody, right?
Yeah, and I think this is such an important message because, one, you spoke there to a lot of things, thank you. And there was a word that really stuck out for me there, which was to get curious about it. The pattern, I've certainly experienced in the past, no doubt. And man, I'm not perfect, but I do my best where I can. And certainly in a lot of the men that I'll work with or have conversations with is, that rumination or even the experiencing of a shitty feeling emotion.
Yeah.
And we kind of like dump on it by then judging ourselves for having that thing and then try and push it away, but it's all I can focus on, and it kind of repeats. And so the invitation there is to get curious. And I think automatically it invites a different approach.
It does.
Right.
So we learn by getting curious, right? So this is what Judson Brewer says, and he's not the first one to say it, that we're not born with fear, we're born curious. And when we get curious and things happen, that brings the fear when it doesn't go so well.
Right.
So for example, you put a child next to a swimming pool, the child will go in the water.
Yeah.
Because we're curious.
Yes.
It will then have a fear of water. The flame of fire, that the child will want to touch the flame because it's just flickering. Doesn't know it's inquisitive, doesn't know it's hot, right? And so we learn by that, because when we get curious, we do something, we get rewarded with dopamine, which says, then that's the way we learn. Mm-hmm. So as a result of that, we learn to worry. We learn to catastrophize because we worry about something, we catastrophize it. Now, how often have we worried about something and it hasn't happened, right? Usually about 90% of the time. Doesn't happen. If it is, it's never as bad as you thought it was because of catastrophization. So the brain goes, oh, right, you worried, it didn't happen. Oh, that's how I'll keep you safe. Cover all the bases.
Yeah.
And
it's almost an idea that behavior. The more I worry and ruminate, the
safer you'll be.
Exactly. Yep. The more I'm creating certainty.
That's it. That's it. I've covered everything, all my bases. Yeah. So if something goes wrong, but it doesn't work like that in real life.
So then how do we actually go about that?
Past, fresh in your.
Yeah. So how do we go about then creating, let's say, and steer this in a different direction if you want to, creating a sense of certainty outside of a snowball of worry.
Right. So there's two options that you have. The first one, I think, is probably the best one. There's three things we can do to stop that stuff going on. The first one is that the third best is to read. When you read something, you're getting additional information into your timeline to add additional information, right? So but it's limiting. The first thing you read is stuck in your head, right? So that if a dog could speak and say one word, what would that word be? A lot of people think woof. Never heard a dog say woof in my life. If you have a dog, you're thinking food or walk, because that's what the first thing you got told a dog needs. What does a cow say? Moo, right? So it's there because that's the first thing you got told, and it's stuck there. So it's sort of limiting. The next thing next best thing is write. And now there's lots of good work around writing therapy. Why? Have you ever written a list of things that you have to do and forgotten to look at your list? Chances are yes. And the reason is it's out of your head, so stops that spiral. Still limited. And those two things are done here in the prefrontal cortex. The third thing is the best one, and that is talking. So first off, the first thing we could do is talk. And when we talk, one, it's out of our head. Two, just like information coming into our head is tagged with emotion, information going out is also tagged. So we're telling people how we feel, even if it's just, oh, I'm thinking this, there's still an emotion attached to it. So we're starting to disarm it. And so the third thing is we compare experiences. So I say to you, I say, oh, I got left home this morning. My wife said, oh, whatever, I don't know. And you say, oh, that happened to me. All I did was stop and go, I beg your pardon. And you know what they said? Love you forever. You probably misheard them. Oh, so we compare experiences. What about if you did all three? What about if you talked with somebody, then read to make sure they're telling you the truth, and then maybe did a bit of a plan, wrote yourself a plan? What about that? Because that's how you stop it. You must take action. Otherwise, this thing will exaggerate the negative to help. It's an automatic problem-solving tool that we no longer need.
And so when you say help, is that essentially saying it wants to stay vigilant to try and keep you safe? And so it's just going to stay in that mode, because then I can be alert for danger, essentially.
So it stays in that mode simply because of cortisol.
Yeah.
So we get adrenaline initially when we get into this heightened state. That only lasts a minute or two, right, to give you energy. After that, if you're continued in that hot overthinking stuff, what happens is cortisol comes, which puts you into a slightly heightened state. And when we're in a heightened state, we're looking for things, looking for danger. And the brain will keep doing it in the pre-conscious or subconscious. It keeps doing it, and it's sitting only within the limbic system. So it's the memory going back to the amygdala, going back to memory, is building a whole lot of things about something that could have been quite simple, designed to keep us safe.
Yeah.
So if you, I think that's probably the best one, is talk with somebody, then read some information. Those two things will bring additional help to you, and then maybe work out a bit of a plan to stick to.
Yeah, and I love this. As you said, like as an example, not to speak ill of writing lists, because you can forget them, but to make the point that when you get something out of your head onto paper, it can actually help. Not necessarily, cure it, but it can help. At least stop or change the train.
Yeah, it does. And so, look, it's really, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but that's what the first thing that, so when I went for help, I had a suicidal ideation, a really bad one. Thoughts of suicide. And I was on the 4th floor of Auckland Central Police Station, and I looked out the window and went, it's not high enough. And I knew, because I'd just become a crisis negotiator, what was happening inside my head. I was in a bad place. So I went to see, we had a wonderful guy. He was a minister, right? So padre, they call him in the military and police. So I went to see the padre, and I said, look, I'm struggling with stuff. I don't know what's going on. And he said, well, come on, let's go and have a bit of a pray. We did. And then he said, I'll tell you what, let's write stuff down. Let's write it down, and we'll set fire to it. And so we did. And I'm like, really? So we wrote this stuff down, we set fire to it, and I went, that's kind of cool. So he's a very wise man, right? When you write something down, it's out of your head. And there's some good work around writing therapy and going back to past events and how writing down and how you felt. And then one of the techniques that I use is look back to see how far you've come, because we don't know when we're recovering.
Yeah.
What did you stop doing? I stopped doing, I didn't sleep, I didn't go out, I didn't wash, I didn't meet people, I didn't go anywhere. I stayed in my room, all of this sort of stuff. I didn't even leave my room, I didn't eat very well. And now where are you? And you tick those off and you go, oh, I'm back doing all those. But what else are you doing? Because I'll guarantee you're doing a lot else that probably seem not associated with it. But I bet, you might be married now and you've got a family, or you might be. So how did you get there? What kept you going? And by doing that little comparison, it's a heck of a motivator to push you through events. Yeah.
Yeah, I can see the power in helping bring some perspective.
Yeah, it does.
And also, the idea of gathering information, quite simply. And this is one of the things, that I explore with a lot of my guys, is the idea of writing and journaling is one, getting things out so we're not so potentially in the head, but also helping me understand things. When it's there, I can actually look back at it. And maybe then I can have the discussion, or, I can't have the discussion now. So on Thursday when I can, I've got some notes, whatever, but I'm actually bringing information. So I kind of arm myself a little bit, which in some senses feels like it's also allowing me to stand on firmer ground a little bit.
That's exactly it, right? So when you write stuff down, it's a guide. It gives you some sense of satisfaction that at least you've done something. You can work on worrying, or work on what's worrying you. I know which one I prefer, the second one.
Yeah.
Right. So
and then we're talking about
these things are action creatures, so you got to take action.
Yeah, I love it. And so then let's talk to the other one, which is point number one, is talking, and what you preceded that with was seeking some support, basically. And I love this because I'm all for this, right? I see men, we struggle a lot of the times. The idea of asking support means I'm some kind of, I'm weak, etc., all this kind of stuff. And there's so much that we can go into in breaking all that down and, essentially disproving it, let's say. But when you're faced with, there might be someone listening who are going, okay, cool, I hear this, I should talk, I should reach out for help, but especially when I'm feeling things, that feels like the most challenging thing for me to do. It feels terrifying and unsafe to be in myself.
It is. And so it's fear that holds us back. Fear of being judged, fear of what they might say, fear of the future, so fear is our biggest emotion. We have 5 major emotions forming a palette of 50. 4 of them are negative, 1's positive. That's where the 80% of our brain is of bad things. That's where that comes from, right? Now, fear holds us back. And so many, many, many people will not reach out for help. Unlike me, who I was lucky. I dodged a bullet, so to speak, right? So I went and realized what was going on at a very early otherwise it just keeps fulfilling that whole thing. Now, talking is the big, whenever we're told we should talk, but we're never told why. I've just told you why. Three particular reasons, and that is the key. Now, so how can we start talking? Well, it depends. Start talking to your dog or your cat. Now, you will find that that's incredible, particularly dogs, right? Now, dogs have a particular type of brain that's a bit different to, and I think pigs might have the same sort of, sounds weird, the same sort of brain. They have parts of it that have emotions, right? And there's a dog, and you just talk to the dog, and if it's the way you talk, it'll go. Yeah. So it's acknowledging.
Yeah, they've got a clue of something.
They pick up on the sound of your voice, right? And they're like, oh, and they can sense when things aren't right. That's why we use them as dogs, support dogs. That's why we use them for all sorts of good reasons. They can tell when you're going to have an epileptic fit. They can guide dogs, so we've got all of it that do all of these sorts of wonderful things because they have a connection with people. And so start there. But it's just having one person you can connect with. And oftentimes it's a stranger. But it must be a genuine and somebody that doesn't help, somebody that doesn't fix it, somebody that just listens in the first instance. Don't fix it. Let them verbalize it.
So I want to ask, why not fix it? Now, I understand this, but for listeners there, because again, I know that as men, we often want to fix. So someone comes to me,
we try and fix it
straight away,
fix it,
right? No, right? Well, let's take your pain away and let's hear some solutions and go and do that, especially in our relationships.
Have you seen the video that I play it in my sessions? The nail in the head.
It's not about the nail. Yes,
it's not about the nail, right?
We'll make sure we put that one in the show notes.
Just pull it out. I'm sure that'll fix everything. It's not about the nail. And I actually play that for a valid reason. Don't fix it. Wait. It's a bit like, we have somebody who's perhaps got, we hear of somebody with cancer or whatever. So we go researching to help them. We give them all this information about, have you tried this? Have you tried this? Have you seen this? Have you seen this? Oh, this is a good one. Don't. They don't want that. They've got expert help. Thanks. They want to know how to deal with life.
Yeah.
And so that's what it's about, right? Being there, listening, offering advice if they ask it.
Yeah. And the piece that I love on that is, if you find yourself sitting in front of someone who's sharing and emptying and needing to emote and vent and all these things, is actually say, hey, how can I support you?
Yeah.
And if they probably don't have any idea, they might say, oh, just listen, like, perfect, I can do that. Yeah. But my question that I want to steer to then is, okay, so if we go to the other side of that dynamic, if I'm the guy who's going, all right, I'm getting here from Lance that if I'm struggling through some shit, I probably need to talk to someone. And it could be a stranger because there's an element of safety there because it's kind of anonymous. But I want it fixed. And you're telling me that they are not to fix it for me. So how do I compute that talking is good, but it's not fixing it, but it's going to help?
So there's a couple of things there as well. So if you want to get it fixed, then go to a fixer. All right. So go and see a psychologist or a psychotherapist.
Yeah.
They'll fix you. Right. But they'll only start to where I've started by listening.
Yeah.
That's the evaluation. It's an hour. And they'll give you some stuff to do of how to get to sleep, and they'll give you something to read, probably, all good stuff. They ain't going to fix it because they're going to slowly bring you out of where you are, because you've taken a while to get down. It's going to take a while, probably twice or 3 times as long to get back out. And so they take it slowly because we just want a quick fix. And often when you do the quick fix, it's just adding to the pile of thoughts coming into the head, and it's counterproductive.
Right.
And so when we go for counseling, counseling is listening. Counselors won't offer advice. The advice they give you is, here's how to get a good night's sleep. Here's 1 or 2 things you might want to change just to remove some of that overwhelmed feeling. That's what they'll do. And then they'll slowly, as you start to come around, they'll give you more and more stuff. Because otherwise, if we give people lots of stuff, if they haven't vented, if they haven't told you everything and let them know how you feel, it keeps the emotion in a height state. So if you can get them to talk and then acknowledge it. Now, for me, it's saying something like, you've been through a lot and you've done really well from what I'm hearing. Imagine if you said that. Wow. You've done really well to get to here. And by the way, thanks for coming to talk with me about it. Because that's another challenge.
Oh, yeah.
Isn't it? And then so then they go, yes, oh, it is, yes. And that's, you just open up the conversation from there. If they want you to fix it, by all means do. Give them a couple of things, but only 1 or 2, not a whole lot.
Yeah.
And I think don't sort out their problems.
Yeah.
Whether it's relationship problems.
I'm glad you came, because I got some ideas for you.
Yeah. I was just talking yesterday to somebody just like you. No, you weren't. Because I'm different.
Yes.
Right. So yeah, what a great. I was just talking about that just before. They don't want to hear that stuff, right? But we want to hear that we're connected with others. I might say it's all about the way what we say, right? And not so much how we say it, but how interconnected we actually are. And so I might say to somebody, well, I've spoken with a few people who've had very, very similar problems or very, very similar thoughts to what you're having right now. And here's what they found helpful. You might as well. So again, I go back to that guiding people rather than fix it. Here's some, and so they now have to again think about which one would work for me.
Yeah.
It's all about thinking.
Yeah, I like that. And also, what I'm hearing in all of this as well is like essentially being clear and about and managing expectations.
Yeah.
I have a bit of a saying in my coaching business that expectations will fuck your life. And really the invitation is to be clear, like the expectation there that I need to fix something for them or someone needs to fix it for me. And actually, as you said, if you go see someone whose job is to quote, fix it, they're going to start by actually setting something very realistic. Let's how do you eat an elephant, right? 1 bite at a time. And so let's give you 1 or 2 bites. And we can start from there. But one thing that I see in so many men is living in a state almost of incredibly high expectations, which are very hard to meet, and then kind of perpetuating, being very hard on themselves because they don't meet them, and then that kind of spins.
Yeah, and this is the thing. The brain focuses on the final outcome. Right. It sees the mountain. It doesn't see the lay points on the way up the mountain. How am I going to get up there? There's your first lay point. There's your next one. And it all starts with 1 foot in front of the other. And again, I go back to what we were talking about earlier with the experience of my shoulder. I've just been told I have to have urgent surgery, and I've really done a good job on this one. And that's why I'm sort of sloping off to one side and the pain's starting to come back again. And so I had this whole, in a flash. And he was a good guy. He said, because I always say, you've got to get the message out. And he went on, he went, right, bad news for you. This is no.
I thought that might have been coming with that little pause.
This is no quick fix.
Yeah.
And he said, but you knew that, didn't you? And I said, yeah. He said, right, it's surgery and it's long. It's not overnight. And so I was like, great. So I started to go catastrophize in an instant. What about my work? What about not realizing I'd just come from work?
Yeah, I've been doing.
And I'm standing up with my broken wing. I should have it in a sling, but I haven't got it in a sling because I'm trying to exercise it without ripping it, just to keep the shoulder moving, right? Otherwise, it's going to end up even worse. And so all I said was, right, what could we do? And I just spoke with my wife, and she said, well, you can take 2 weeks off when you have the surgery. Of course I can. or, you know, the 1 week of surgery and recovery, and then another week just to make sure it's coming right. And then what a great intro to a presentation on resilience. Hi, I'm Lance. I've broken my shoulder. Life comes at you, right? And so being able to stand up and go, you know, things happen, shit happens, if you like. It does happen, but it's just as important that you deal with that shit, and it's the small shit that builds up to bring big, right? So just deal with things, or by all means prepare. So I'm already starting to prepare. I'm already thinking about what I can do and how I can, once the surgery's done, and how can I recover, and with the physio and that, and we've got a set up upstairs anyway. That's a bit of a gym, and so I'm already planning, but I'm also planning to stay at work.
Yeah, and I'm hearing a key difference there. Yeah, I'm hearing a key difference exactly between planning, preparing, and ruminating, catastrophizing, and what ifs and all that stuff, which actually keeps you frozen in the one spot.
It does. Well, you just get stuck. It becomes overwhelming.
Yeah,
it's one step at a time. So my first step is to get a letter to go off to the surgeon so I can get a referral for an MRI scan. And once we've got that, we'll know a bit more, right? So it's one step at a time. And so for the next week, I'll just be waiting for, it'll probably take a week. I'll have an MRI, and then it'll take another 2 or 3 weeks. And then I'll go and see the surgeon, another 2 or 3 weeks. And, you know, eventually I'll get some surgery done. And then what can we do? So I'm already thinking, I've got a book to write. It's supposed to be finished December last year. It'll be finished December this year. So I've got a microphone here. I can just dictate some of the book. I've got plenty to do, Lance. So just sit there and shut up.
Some lemonade to make.
Talking to myself, right? Just shut up. And so I again, the way I deal with things is jokes. So I just said to my wife, I said, oh, you know, it's just Lance has got a broken wing. He needs to have some recovery, and what a wonderful time to do it.
Yeah, there's some annoyance there, but there can be some opportunity in it. So, Lance, the last
and
thing,
another story to add to my
exactly. I'm sure it can be twisted in many ways.
I've had skin cancer. I've had melanoma. I've had depression. And so you just have some more. Because the other thing was they do a comparison on the other shoulder, and he put it up there, and he went, "Ooh." He said, "I know." He says, "You've had a hard life, eh?" I said, "Oh, I did some things in the police, yeah." He said, "Really?" And I thought he was going to say, "You need both shoulders done," but thank goodness he didn't say that. But he said, "Oh, we do a comparison." He said, there's a bit of work to do on this side as well.
Yeah, it's hard to compare it. It can be because the benchmark is also got some work. Put things in perspective, right? And so it's hard to do. We all look. You can never be happy all the time. You can never not catastrophize all the time. Don't think that because I work in this stuff and you work in this stuff that we are all good, thank you. Yes.
And we don't need help. Doctors get sick. And that's why they have to have another doctor. So they can't diagnose, because they can't diagnose yourself because you're in an emotional state. We all have to go and get help. Even doctors need somebody else to write out a script. And that's the key, right? We all need help with each other.
Yeah, I love that. And the people who we have around us are very important. And I think what it does is it invites reflection on, one, who am I surrounding myself with? Who do I want to surround myself with? And like, what are those relationships? And, you know, the give and take in terms of what I add, etc. Because again, you know, I see a lot of men who struggle with the idea of leaning on those people around them. Now, you can lean on me. I'm strong, but I don't really like the idea of leaning on others. But, you know, there's that simple invitation there. Well, you know what? Sometimes just talking is the simplest thing to actually support you.
Do you know our brain is wired like that? So I'm going to ask you 3 questions, and I'll see if I can guess at least 2 of your answers, right? Okay. So I want you to think of one thing you're grateful for in your work life, other than the fact you've got a job. What else about your work life are you grateful for? I want you to think of one thing you're grateful for in your personal life, and one thing you're grateful for about yourself. Now, for most people, their work, they're thinking of their colleagues, the people they work with, the people they help, depending on their role. For our personal life, most of us think of our family, our whānau. sometimes our friends, but mostly our family. And for ourselves, most people go, never really thought about that before. And they'll come up with I'm in a single word. I'm kind, I'm here, I'm healthy, right? How do I do?
Yeah, so I went to my clients, the people that I work with, in terms of help. To your point, my daughter, my wife, my whānau, and to myself, I was grateful for my determination.
There you go, because of the work you do.
Mm.
But if I was to say to you, how are you going? How are you going? Your automatic reaction is good, great, right? Fine, I'm good.
Well, do you know what? I love this question, Lance, because I know this exact point, and I've made a very consistent and conscious effort myself in the last few years to answer that question honestly. Yeah, and the thing that I love is that I'm considered by nature, and so I'll spend some time in reflection, but I'll consider, and I'm not doing it to mess with someone, but what I will notice often is I'll consider and I'll give an honest answer, and then they think, doesn't matter what comes in the answer, the gap concerns them.
Yes, that's called an effective pause.
Yeah, they think, what the? And I said, oh no, I'm fine. Yeah, I'm what I just said. I just wanted to give you the respect of an honest answer.
So, and then one of the things I saw, there's a couple of answers to that. If somebody asks me how I feel, I want them to think about what they've said. So I'll just say to them, how long have you got? Because I've got some things.
Nice.
And they sort of, I go, no. And just to get them to think, are you just saying hello? Well, then say hello.
Yeah.
Or are you genuine about it? Now, if you want to know what to ask somebody, it's what's going on. That's all those programs, going back to that suicide stuff. If you ask somebody, are you okay? Yes. It's an automatic response that we have. And going back to that further point of your last point
yes or no.
About exactly right. So what's going on? What do you mean? Well, you just don't seem to be your usual self, or I just want to know what's going on. I'm here to chat. So when somebody asks me, and I do that, but if I ask you what's going on, and you how are you doing, you say good.
Yeah.
Instead of that gap, what I say is, are you? So same thing, right? Are you?
Yeah.
And I want you to say, and I see them go, yeah, no, I am.
Shit, you made me think about it.
Yeah, don't do that to me. Once one person said, why? What are you seeing? Well, I can't see.
Yeah, what do you know?
Well, I can see when people are struggling, but you're all good, I think, aren't you?
Yeah.
And so it's to get people to think about that. Again, it's all about here. But we are a connected species, right? And, if I was to come to you and say, can I give you a hand with that? Our first response is usually, no, I've got this, I'm good, which leads to that earlier comment about going for help. I've got this. Again, it's the way we're wired. So there's, it's brave. It's bravery to come forward. Absolute. It's the bravest thing you will ever do in your life is to say, I need help. It is but yet, get something wrong with your shoulder. How do I fix it? Get something wrong with this. Oh, no, I reckon I can work it out. I'm not telling anybody else what's going on up here. Oof, what will they think of me? Well, I'll tell you what they think of you. If I said it to me, I'll be thinking, what a brave person. And oftentimes I'll say to somebody, can I first off say thank you for bringing this to me? That's my first thank you, because it shows me that you've got the strength and the courage to take the first step. And every step from now on is going to be easier.
Beautiful. I love that. Thank you, Lance. I think that's a beautiful spot for us to wrap. So beyond having at some point shoulder surgery, do you want to share with us, if there's anything that you've got going on, but at the very least, where people can find you? We'll make sure we put links and all that stuff.
Yeah, sure. So our company is Bourne International, WARN, which is an acronym for Wellness, Awareness, Resilience, and Negotiation. With Brainworks in threes, I joked the other day it should only be 3 WAR, but you can't tell we're from War International Limited. doesn't quite
Yeah.
fit the mold right of our work. We've got YouTube channels. We've got, lots of free stuff. I've written a couple of books, and now we've got lots of things there for people to help. But
Yes, I didn't mean to mention your book, Dark Side of the Brain. Sorry, but
that's all good. Yeah, so one
rolling.
before then was called Behind the Tapes. That was my journey into depression.
Right.
So it's a bit of a memoir, but it's how these things can sneak up on you. So I tell quite a bit, which first responders really like that book because it resonates with them and how these things build up. So we've got that there, but we've just launched the third part of our business. And so just like life, we've learned to live with and adapt to what's going on. So we've got 3 methods of delivery now. So we do the in-person keynotes and workshops, also do, and we can deliver those virtually, if you like, through Google and all the rest of it. But we've also now got e-learning videos, so online learning videos. I'm just doing this only 15 minutes long, and you learn a lot. But now we've got something called the 10-week challenge, which is, and they're broken into communication, safety, and resiliency. And each day you get to do one task, a little task. And the last one we've just finished, which I love, is safety. And it's the tricks and tips of Jason Bourne. Right. So it comes from my time in the police of working with I worked in the covert areas and ran witness protection for 2.5 years.
Right.
And so in there's some real gold, and people
just
love it, right? How do you know if you're being followed, and what do you do if you do? And they get so involved in it because they feel like they're a spy. But all it is simple things to make you feel calm. So when you walk into a cafe, look around. You're not looking for every little thing. You're just looking around to see who's there. That one never face the door. You can, with your back to the door, you can have your back to the door, but just make sure you look around to see who's in there first. And each time somebody comes through, you might just do it. If you're with a friend, they'll tell you if somebody's behind. So it's not so much all that secret stuff, but it's just about getting used to using peripheral vision. When you're walking down the road, how far either side can you see without moving your eyes? And every day is something different, and people love it, right? So on the resilience one, on the adaptability one, go home tonight and fix one thing in your house every night for the next 4 nights. Just fix that light bulb. Next day, fix that squeaky door. Next day, and it shows people how these little things can make such a massive change. And that's what it is. And that's life, isn't it? One step at a time. It's only a very small step. And if you do that small step every day, you're going to achieve greatness.
Beautiful. What a poignant message to end on. I love that. Thank you very much, Lance, for your time, for sharing, especially coming fresh out of that appointment and having a not so great shoulder.
We'll back and catastrophize now, right?
Exactly. We'll make sure we get all the notes and all that stuff out there. Thank you very much for coming on the show, you bloody legend.
Wonderful to be here. Thanks so much. Appreciate it.